So you have Indo-Mesopotamian religion, you have the Qumran community, you have Gnosticism, there are lots of different kinds. You have Manichaeism, also different kinds. You have Neoplatonism, all embraced similar dupied concepts. Well, what are they? Number one, humanity's fall occurred by free will, after which free will was lost. This is false. It's false. We've already pointed out, to even use the term fall, to use the term free will, given the differences between these groups. I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to about Indo-Mesopotamian religion, unless it's the earlier forms of what feeds into Manichaeism. But, and in fact, in Gnosticism, Manichaeism, in Valentinian Gnosticism, the actual taking of the fruit is a good thing. The Christ spirit is sent because gnosis is a good thing. So number one in the definition of dupied, none of the people who held any of these views would have agreed. Well, maybe the Qumran community. Maybe the Qumran community. I suppose that'd be one. But none of the rest of them would even have a category to even work with. Number two, unavoidable, divinely fated actions remain punishable. Again, just looking for a meaningful way of understanding these statements. It would be true of Qumran without the word fated. That's a prejudicial term. Fate is impersonal. A decree is personal. I don't care if you don't want to utilize, if you don't want to recognize those differences, the differences actually exist. But unavoidable actions remain punishable. This confuses the eternal and the temporal on the Christian level. Leaving all those things aside, how do you even have a meaningful understanding of punishable between these different perspectives? Punishable by whom? When in Manichaeism and in Gnosticism, the physical realm at the end of time is destroyed, either after all the light particles are removed or whatever other strange forms of eschatology Valentinianism had, and whatever. When the physical realm is dissolved in Gnosticism, it's in Manichaeism, it's not dissolved, it's just separated from the realm of light back to the way things were, because they're two equal realms. How is that punishment? How is that punishment? Punishment on the basis of what? You see, the only way that for punishment to be relevant is if there is an overarching law that governs all of this. You don't have that in Gnosticism or Manichaeism. It's just not there. I'm not sure how the Neoplatonists would deal with this, to be honest with you. Or if they would even have a basis for a concept of punishment in that way. But unavoidable, divinely fated actions remain punishable. That would be understood by each one of these groups in a completely different fashion, and would be rejected by Reformed people entirely because of its aberrant assertion. So number three, a scare quote, dead will, scare quote, required God's extreme grace to resurrect dead souls in order for the unilaterally predetermined elect to receive salvation. Once again, a surface level attempt to take a bad representation of modern Reformed theology and read it back into ancient perspectives, none of whom could have understood what was being said. All of whom would have defined the key terms of this tortuous sentence in completely different ways. So, dead will. What would a dead will mean to a Manichaean over against a Sethian Gnostic, over against a Valentinian Gnostic, over against a Neoplatonist, over against the Indo-Mesopotamian, over against one of the Essenes? Each one would define the nature of man differently, will differently. To say dead will, how do you define that? When are we talking about the fragment of light? Is that ever dead? What about amongst the Gnostics? Is the result of Yaldabaoth's exercise of divine power he received from his mother Sophia able to create a true soul? Why does Yaldabaoth Eve to get the divine power from her? How does that relate to then the nature of Adam and Eve and their wills? And it's a transparent effort to find completely bogus parallels. This is the same stuff that is used, mentioned this yesterday, the same type of argumentation is used to try to draw parallels to the Jesus story that you'll find splattered all over the internet, on YouTube and everything else, proving that Christianity is not unique, etc., etc., etc. This is the same kind of reasoning that's being used. God's extreme grace. You could not provide a meaningful connection between what that would mean to Calvin and Augustine back to the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, the Valentinians, the Neoplatonists, or the Stoics. They would have no idea. The community at Qumran, because they have God's scriptures and they actually believe God's scriptures, they would have a foundation for an understanding of that. Definitely. The rest of them wouldn't. Number 4, although scare quote offered scare quote to all, only the elect could receive faith as God's gift. Again, meaning of elect completely different amongst all these groups. Faith, different definition. What does it mean that it's God's gift? Why did lots of church fathers before Augustine believe that Ephesians 2 said that faith is God's gift? These are questions that must be asked, but although, quote, offered to all. This is, again, is a very poor effort to read Reformed theology, a badly framed Reformed theology, back into this context to create the very connections that then he goes, voila, look at all my study. Look at these connections. Yeah, he started with them. He asserted them from the start. There was no meaningful argumentation before this in the summary statements that actually establishes any of this stuff. It's just simply asserted. It's a bunch of assertions. And my understanding of scholarship may be different than other people's, but my understanding is when you write a doctoral dissertation, you actually have to back up what you're asserting and argue for it in a meaningful and consistent fashion. So, finally, number 5, the one/God/Redeemer infuses the gift of love, instantaneously resurrecting dead wills. When he gave what he commanded, God could command what he willed. Now, the last two phrases are a paraphrase of Augustine. So, if you're paraphrasing Augustine as a part of what all these other groups allegedly believed, you haven't established that yet. You have not established a similarity of terminology, that this summary would actually be meaningful in any of these. Haven't established any of that yet. But when you actually paraphrase Augustine and then make that a part of your opening summary of the first chapter, then you're going to supposedly argue for it later on. That's called arguing a circle. Okay, you've already made your conclusion, and shockingly, you're going to come to the same conclusion at the end of everything too. How did that work? Oh, well, it's because it's not being argued appropriately by any stretch of the imagination. So the one God Redeemer infuses the gift of love, instantaneously resurrecting dead wills. How does that happen in Gnosticism? Well, and it would be different between Sethian Gnosticism and Valentinian Gnosticism. So how does that exactly work? I don't know. I don't think they would have understood anything that was being said there. And even if you could come up with a way to make it relevant to them, that would require changing the meanings of the words so it's no longer relevant to Reformed theology. Trying to maintain this connection is simply impossible. It's not done here. So there is the assertion at this is page, under the conclusion, this is page 37. I'm sorry, page 38. And this is definitional to what the rest of the work is going to be, what it's going to say. And it's simply wrong from the start. Foundationally corrupt. Foundationally corrupt. These are impressive commonalities in sharing Stoic-type providence and divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destinies. Well, no, they're not, actually. They're fake. You may assert them. You haven't grounded it. And there are so many obvious category errors that, again, most of us are just sitting around going, did anyone read this? What happened here? I don't get it. Christian heretics empowered Gnosticism. Valentinian, which should be Valentinus, appealed to Scripture, Romans 11, proving God offered salvation to all, but only the elect with freed wills could receive it. Only the elect with freed wills. So are you connecting the spiritual with the elect over against the psychikos? Because, as I pointed out yesterday, there was actually discussions amongst Valentinians as to whether the soulish could receive the gnosis and therefore receive a form of return to the one. But notice, proving God offered salvation to all. God offering salvation has a meaning for a provisionist that it didn't have for a Valentinian. Different meanings, different context. Certainly different for the Gnostic. But only the elect. There is no decree of elect that determines the identity of the elect. With freed wills could receive it. Freed wills from what? Valentinus taught it was Jesus that helped Adam and Eve to partake of the fruit. The Gnostic Basilides claimed initial faith itself was God's gift, as did numerous other people in that day. Paganism contributed to Plotinus's one, remained just and good by definition despite his inexplicable arbitrary injustice. Paganism contributed. It doesn't even make sense in English. It doesn't. I'm sorry. I'll read it again. Paganism contributed as Plotinus's one, remained just and good by definition despite his inexplicable arbitrary injustice. So, who's the his? I'd assume Plotinus's one, but it could be Plotinus. What did paganism contribute? Okay, divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destinies appears inevitable In any philosophy, when a theory of totalitarian providence demands God must resurrect the totally incapacitated will, non-free free will, and infuse salvific faith as a gift of grace. Now, what's he describing here? He's describing Reformed theology. So what's he trying to do? He's trying to forge that connection. What's the result? He's taking his understanding and fabricating connections amongst categories that are completely disparate from one another foundationally, so as to create this idea of the connection via Augustine through to Reformed theology. Appears inevitable in any philosophy when a theory of totalitarian providence. I would assume that totalitarian providence is supposed to be something like Ephesians 1:11, works all things after the counsel of his will. Psalm 135:6, Daniel 4. Is that what that's about? God's sovereign decree determining the very fabric of time, the Westminster Confession of Faith, the London Baptist Confession of Faith, I would assume, demands God must resurrect the totally incapacitated will. You mean raised to spiritual life? Use biblical terminology, yes, raised to spiritual life, and freed from the slavery to sin, John 8. Yep, that's what the Son can do, definitely. And infuse salvific faith as a gift by grace, if that means regeneration, the making of a new heart, taking out a heart of stone, giving a heart of flesh. If what you're saying is infuse, would be the same thing as what we have in the prophets. I will take out a heart of stone. I will give you a heart of flesh. If that has to be infused, I guess. It's strange terminology, but okay. Although Dupid could perhaps theoretically be held without a micromanaging direct providence, starting with the latter assumption apparently predestines the position of divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destiny. That appeared 4 times in one paragraph. 3 times spelled out, and once as an acronym. I wonder how long this book would be if he had just used the acronym after the first time. Probably been 20 pages shorter. Just simply would have been much cheaper to typeset. But although Dupid could perhaps theoretically be held without a micromanaging direct providence, so without a divine decree, starting with the latter assumption of what? Apparently predestines the position of Dupid. I'm just reading it, folks, and most of the time it just don't make no sense. It's just so poorly written. But predictably, no ancient religion or philosophy dared deny free will. Creative philosophical manipulations provide a semblance of free will while denying its effective capacity. So, if you don't hold to full autonomy, then you can't ever use the term free will. You can't have creaturely free will. You can't have God has autonomous will and makes man with a creaturely free will. No, it's not really real. It's denying its effective capacity. Effective capacity, in other words, being fully autonomous. Even the strictest determinists retained the carcass of free will. Notice carcass of free will. There's nothing unbiased about this work. Although it had been gutted of meaningful choice as non-free free will. The public was not so gullible. Stoicism's declining popularity required Marcus Aurelius to finally soften its determinism. Heretical and pagan concepts of divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destinies with non-free free will were being confronted with freedom of choice by Christian authors. Dun, dun, dun. The Christians were coming with their autonomy. Well, except for those ones that we looked at earlier that believed in the elect. But anyway, not until circa 200 CE with Alexander of Aphrodisias, when we forget aphrodisiac, did the pagan debate progress to Judeo-Christian free will. Progress to Judeo-Christian free will. To progress to the level of it? To the substance of it? What? We're not told. He denounced Stoic and Neoplatonic determinism as impeding persons' moral development, argued for a genuine alternative choice, and limited providence from controlling every detail of human action. Alexander forged a compromise between the two extremes of the Epicurean denial of any divine interference with the physical world and Stoic meticulous micromanaging providence, which again shouldn't have a providence with capital P because it's not personal. Judaism had previously held such a view. One might argue that in addition to Alexander's peripatetic objections to Stoic blending, prior Christians authors' philosophical refutations, Justin Martyr, Tatian, Irenaeus Clement, had influenced pagan theological debates by 200 CE. Christians vehemently opposed the deterministic Stoic, Gnostic, Neoplatonic, and Manichaean non-free free will. Well, you just said 200 CE. Mani was born then, so they hadn't opposed any Manichaeism at this point. Early Christians emphatically rejected the divine unilateral predetermination of individuals' eternal destinies of heretics and pagans by hailing a Judeo-Christian residual freedom of choice in determining eternal destinies. Why? Because God's foreordination to salvation occurred through foreknowledge of a human faith response, as the next chapters will demonstrate. So there you have the thesis. There you have it laid out early on. This is a person who went into this study with an absolute fixed endpoint. I am going to prove that election is solely based upon God looking down the corridors of time and seeing what mankind's to do. There is no divine decree. And I am going to find divine decree in all the pagan religions, but not in Christianity. It's clear, compelling, very obvious.